Steve, can we start with a roll call?
Certainly. I'm going to do Miss Wells first because otherwise I'll forget.
Right.
I'm here.
Miss Langalis,
Here.
Mr. Williams,
Here.
Ms. Tabachnik,
Here.
Ms. Jordan Byron,
Present.
Mr. Mushak,
Here.
Mr. Bryce,
Present.
Mr. Cantor,
Here.
Mr. Rowena,
Here.
and Mr. Shulman.
Here. And our meeting, which we're going to try to hold, as we had said, to just about 9 o'clock, maybe a little bit earlier this evening, is going to be 2023-19 R/M Planning and Zoning Commission zoning text amendment for complete rewrite of the zoning regulations and map amendment for complete rezoning of the entire city. And this will be a continuation of our earlier conversations and our conversations going forward as well. With that, Steve, I'll first turn it over to you.
Certainly. I think where we kind of left off, we've had two pretty good discussions in a row about some of the edits. One was related to the map and the other one we started going through the use table. So I think what the plan would be for tonight would be to pick up those areas on the map that were kind of left a little bit unresolved that you wanted to go back and revisit. We could go through those. I'd sent out a memo related to kind of 3 specific areas that we got external requests for changes to the draft zoning map. So we could go through those and, assuming there's still some time after that, we could circle back onto the use table as well. So I think that's a good way to start. I think Brian can pull up the memo that went out was like the revised memo on some of those changes. And we can kind of just follow down through those and, we could talk about the areas that were left TBD for lack of better term. So the first one was Elton Court, which is kind of just north of 95, kind of tucked away in just to the northwest of the exit 16 intersection. The existing zoning in that area is B residence, which is single family. You can see from the map in the middle, that's got the B designation. So that's a single family zone. It's surrounded by what's known as the East Avenue Village District, which is a mixed use zone. And if you think about that section of East Avenue kind of running from 95 north up towards Wall Street, it's that mix of a lot of different kind of professional office use with a little bit of residential mixed in. It's kind of an interesting area. And this is like a little pocket of single family zoning that's left in there. Staff had proposed that the area be rezoned to the CD3, which would allow 1 or 2 family development. Again, no one is forced to do 2 family. It's an option that they could pursue. We figured given its location to other businesses in the area, its proximity to mass transit and the highway, that it might be a good area to add some soft density. There were some questions raised, and the map on the right, which you see on the screen there, shows the existing density with pretty much everybody being single family now. There was a couple questions raised on whether this was appropriate to go to 2 family. So we just thought it'd be good to revisit it tonight and have that conversation.
I'll start. I still think this makes sense to upzone, given everything else around it and everything that you said.
I agree, and I think to add on to that a little bit, the accessibility to Oyster Shell Park and Lockwood Matthews would be a good reason to upzone to allow for single or 2 family, as there's not many other pockets that are that close to either of those nice amenities that we have here. And I believe the 95 bridge, the Yankee Doodle Bridge, now has the sidewalk open again for that accessibility as well.
I'm going to take the opposing opinion again. I think it's a really nice little neighborhood, and there's only one property in that whole neighborhood that has the two-family designation, and I think it should be left the same because the residents that live there probably want it to be left the same.
Steve, has there been any?
Proposal makes sense. I agree with, with Nick and with, Chapin. That it makes sense to upzone that small little pocket.
Our neighborhood's upzoned.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, people in general, we heard loud and clear at our public meetings that people do not want their neighborhoods upzoned. And in this particular situation, with the exception of that one property in the right lower corner, they're all single-family houses.
Right, that's because that's what they could be before, but if it was upzoned, it could be 20 years before there are 3 or 4, two-family houses. The changes aren't going to be rapid by any stretch of the imagination.
I have to
think-
agree with Galen and with
We do the
Lou.
ADUs.
I'm sorry, I have to agree with Galen and with Steve that just because you designate it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. I think it probably most likely, if anybody wanted to do it, it would be over time. And it, as you said, Tammy, this is a nice tight knit little pocket. So most likely, even though the designation may be there, it may never change.
That's possible, but and people could also do ADUs there. There's one, that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
one property there that has an ADU. So why not let the
Okay.
ADU have a chance? I would
Yeah.
suggest.
Yeah. So I'm gonna weigh in and say that I like the option that's available, and if people don't want to take it up, then that's their right. But at least
Steve,
the option is there.
Steve, what are the average size of those lots?
Let me, I can probably tell you that in a sec. I gotta just,
Okay.
I think I have a map open that has that.
Yeah, they're probably around 6,000 square feet. I mean, minimum lot size for B residence zone is 6,250. So around that would be my best guess.
And this encompasses 148 East Ave, correct? Like that area? Just so people can kind of get an idea of where it is.
Right. I think 148.
Right before you get onto the on-ramp for 16.
It's right behind St. Anne's, and there's a medical office. There's sidewalks, small houses. I mean, I'm looking at the streets. They don't seem like the other part that I was concerned about. They don't seem, too narrow. And I think trying to remember that the purpose of this part of the process is having some consistency with higher density towards these areas and creating opportunities for more housing in a small scale as opposed to large scale. And so, I mean, this matches that. They could do ADUs now. This gives them the option that instead of doing an ADU, if the property allowed for it and they wanted to throw on a second door, they could, but they very well might not. But at least the possibility for more housing is created without, because I could also see somebody coming in here if this was zoned higher and putting high rises there. It's so close to the water, and I personally wouldn't want that. I don't know. I think it makes sense, but if there were a lot of members from those streets who were against it, I don't feel like I've heard from that area. I don't know. I mean, I can be convinced, but I think this is a good example of what we're trying to do.
Just
Right, I think so
did
too.
a quick look, the lot areas range from about 4,500 square feet to about 6,000 square feet.
Okay.
mostly 1/10 of an acre, in other words.
Right.
Correct, yep.
They're already tight, so somebody would probably have to tear down a house and rebuild it to get a multifamily in there unless they converted their existing house to a two-family. They're
I'm-
all,
Like if we don't add to the stock, prices are never going to change. We're like, that's the thing we keep talking about is attempting at affordability. And, you know, Tim, you know best. What's the average price in Norwalk right now?
it's about 650,000.
So that means you need
Pre-pandemic, less than
so
that.
for a
pre-pandemic.
new family to move in, you need 120K in cash for a down payment to really start.
Mhm.
Like we're pricing out a big portion of the city by doing and having the policy that we have. So I'm really going to keep pushing on this, that like we need to be where we can be thoughtful and want to add to the stock in reasonable ways. We need to.
Nick,
Well, it's
I
a
don't,
positive thing when
I don't
real
dis- I
estate
don't
values are
dis-
going up. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing. It means people want to live here.
I don't
Yeah, but
disagree.
it means the
Oh.
fewer people could buy houses here, right?
Um,
So-
however, this is not where the growth in density is going to come from. It's going to come from the larger projects that are being done, the large apartment projects, which will feed the growth of the city. My concern here, and like several of you, I could be convinced one way or the other. This is an older neighborhood. People are probably going to be aging out. Once they choose to move out, if we've changed the zoning, then frankly, the most likely thing that will happen is a second house will go in, because anyone who wants to invest will find, I think, a good place to invest there. So I think, unfortunately, it may be a neighborhood, given its small size, that could change actually fairly quickly. And so I mean, I know I'm not adding to the decision making here because I feel so ambivalent about it myself. But I think it's a neighborhood that might well change quickly.
Mr. Schulman, if I could push back a little bit on something you said earlier, I think
Sure.
that the larger apartment buildings will play a larger role in providing more housing stock and density if we don't also permit the CD3 in more places to allow that multifamily or that two-family ability. And I know that some of the feedback that we heard at the public hearings as well around not wanting to be like Stanford, not wanting to have the high rises in the large apartment buildings. And so I do want to make sure, to JJ's point, that we do provide some of this soft, I think it was JJ who said that, sorry if I'm attributing incorrectly, some of this soft increased density in order to have more of the area absorb some of the density needs that are needed, or the residential needs that are needed, to make sure that housing prices are still affordable, and that, we have more housing diversity within the area.
Right. Housing options for certain.
Yeah.
Yeah, plus, it
I
means,
I'll get
I'm
one.
sorry.
Galen, you go ahead, then Darius, you wanted to.
Okay, I just want to say, if you can do a two-family house, it means it makes it more affordable to buy that house. That a young couple, if they can convert it into a two-family house, they can buy it and help pay their mortgage with the rent for the second unit. We've learned that most of the vast majority of these two-family houses are owner occupied. So it provides the missing middle, and that was something we were always intending to do. So anyway, go ahead, Darius. That's my point.
Well, I am pretty ambivalent on this as well. My concern really is about the traffic in this area. it is already a heavily trafficked area, congested at times. But I do think that what is proposed here could fit, so.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question I'd like to ask Steve.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Steve, if these properties that are considered for upzoning, what is the parking requirement for a new two-family on an upzoned street like this?
Every new, if a new two-family was built, would have to provide 4 off-street spaces, and they have to conform to all the standards in terms of location and size.
So if it was converted to if it was converted to a two-family, it would require 4 spaces then?
Correct.
And if it was an ADU, it would be 2 + 1.
Correct.
How is that multifamily parking? I got myself a little bit confused on this because I know we have a numerical formula that's not 2 per unit for the larger apartment buildings. So it's staying 2 per unit then for the smaller ones?
Correct. So one single and two families is 2 per unit. Multi, which we call 3 or more, is 1.3 per unit.
3 or more.
And
So-
then ADU is 3, so a 2-family is gonna get you more off-street parking than an ADU.
Yep, right. And we can't, I mean, one thing we can't control is if you have a family with 5 cars. I mean, it's just not something we can regulate. If all your kids are home or whatever, that, and then they might park on the street. That we've had some preliminary conversations. I'm trying to apologize if I don't want to get off topic, but at maybe one of your October meetings, we'll have that conversation with TMP about the residential parking permit program.
Yes, that'd be great.
Can I correct something, Lou?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a distinction between a 2-family home that could be, one half could be occupied by the owner and the other half could be occupied by a tenant, versus an investor could own a 2-family home and rent out both sides. And multifamily homes in general, whether they're 2 or 3, like multifamilies that were built a long time ago on Gregory Boulevard, might be owner occupied, but in general, they cost more. So the first time home buyer who thinks they're going to buy one, it's stronger mortgage commitments or stronger regulations and requirements for a mortgage to buy a multifamily home than it is a 2-family home. So that kind of negates the argument that it helps somebody buy a home. Perhaps if they're buying half a home and it's being sold and set up as a condominium or a co-op, but we already know right now that the banks aren't lending for that type of property. So I think you have to be careful how you're defining these and saying it's more affordable, because multifamily homes are not necessarily more affordable for any buyer due to the requirements that they have, because what if somebody wasn't renting one of the units? So it's not just so simple as saying it's going to make it less expensive for somebody. It isn't necessarily. Could be a great investment, but it might not be.
Quick question on
In
that.
multifamily, you mean more than 2 families, right?
Correct.
We're talking
Yeah,
about
we're talking about
2-family.
2 families here.
Right.
Not
Yeah, but a
talking about
2-family
multiple.
home could be, have one owner and just be divided, rent on one side, rent on the other, and it could be owned by an investment person, not necessarily by somebody who's living in one half and renting the other half.
Right, and a single family home could be owned by an investment person and rented to the person who lives in it too.
Right. So it's not improving the opportunity necessarily for home ownership. That's a fallacy.
I'm going to disagree on that. I think a lot of studies have shown increasing supply down the line decreases prices along the market.
Well, that might be if we added, say, 10,000 housing units to Norwalk, but the demand is still way outstripping the supply, and it has been since the pandemic. Before the pandemic, Connecticut was kind of going down the drain, quite frankly. There were more people leaving the state than were coming into the state. But I'm sorry, I don't want to get involved in that. We digress. But yeah, supply and demand is the way it works out, and people buy what they can afford. But I
Let's,
think you bring down the value of these neighborhoods by sticking in a lot of multifamily housing.
But didn't staff memos show actually the opposite? Do you just disagree with staff memos?
It showed something, but I live this, you know, I go out there with people. Look at Flax Hill Road by Scribner Avenue. There were 4 multifamily houses put in what were probably some nice older turn of the century homes back in the 60s. The front yards are all paved over, multiple cars, and it brings down the value of the houses on either side and across the street.
For those multifamilies or two families?
They're
those were on
two-family
Two
houses.
families. And so under the old regulations, that like under these regulations, you wouldn't be able to pave the front yard, right?
Hopefully not, but it's done.
Okay.
I mean, it's sort of
And-
sad.
Well,
Right, and it has to look like a single family house. There are increased design requirements on these two families that aren't currently in place in the current regulations. Is that correct?
there are some, yes.
Like, for example, I recently lived in a 2-family house that looked like a single family from the front.
In
Lovely.
general, the
right?
older houses that were built in the early 1900s that were either 2 or multifamily look like more traditional single family. But the ones that were built in the 60s and 70s
Right.
look like cookie cutter rental houses. Well,
Right.
2-family. Yeah.
I'm gonna say something, Mike here.
Go ahead.
I own a 1908 house across the street from where I live, which my house is 1891, was a 2-family, but it was not a conforming second apartment in my house. And the entrance was on a fire escape and it only had one exit. So in order to make that conforming, I would have had to spend about $200,000. So I converted that unit actually to my office. So I have a single family house now, but I bought a single family house across the street from me, and we're in a former C zone, or still is C zone, but 2-family zone. So I made a single family house built in 1908, a historic house, into a 2-family. And I needed the 4 spaces, which was strictly enforced, because I remember I was about 6 inches shy on one of my spaces, or I had to take out a stump with an excavator that cost me about $3,000. And I begged that I would have a tenant that only had 1 car. It didn't matter. I was treated like anybody else, and fairly, but I got the 4 spaces in and made that 2-family house. But not everybody's going to do that, what I did, because my house looks like the same. It has 1 front door. We put the 2 doors to enter the 2 units behind the existing front door and off a foyer. And it looks like a single family house, and it actually looks a lot better than it did when it was a single family, because I sunk a lot of money into that house and renovated it. I am not a developer, and I'm not planning on investing ever again in another 2-family. So I have no conflict of interest here. That house was abandoned, and actually inspired the blight ordinance in the city, because I pushed for the blight ordinance 10 years ago in 2012, because that house, the staff couldn't do anything with that abandoned house. It was very difficult. It was owned by a family. They refused to do anything. And so once the blight ordinance kicked in, that house and a whole bunch of other houses in our neighborhood that were abandoned quickly were sold, and it works. So the blight ordinance did work. Anyway, I'm getting off subject here, except to say, yes, you can make a single family look like a 2-family, but not everybody's going to do that. And with this zone, where it is, I think it's okay to have this upzoned based on its, what it's surrounded by, its proximity. I have the same fear I had in previous meetings of paving backyards. Garage spaces do count, by the way, for Richard's I guess you asked the question earlier, Richard, but you know, a two-car garage would count as 2 spaces. The driveway in front of the two-car garage would count as the additional 2 spaces, as long as they were behind the front yard setback. Is that, I think that's correct, Steve, right? And then we have language in there to allow an extra space on smaller lots if it's screened properly in the front yard setback, which was something I pushed for. So I still have that fear here, but I don't think this neighborhood is going to change with an upzone radically. I do know that this is a diverse neighborhood, and that it may potentially increase someone's asset holding in terms of increase the value of their property, making it upzone to 2-family. In our neighborhood, the 2 families are going for a premium relative to the single-family houses. So there's you know, I'm getting blind offers on my 2-family across the street, just people slipping things under the door in the mailbox constantly because they're in high demand, and possibly by absentee landlords, I would assume, but I am not planning on selling, and I'm an absentee landlord, but I live across the street and I keep that property impeccable. But unfortunately, a lot of landlords are not like me. But I don't see. I see only positives from this going from well, I was going to say from B to C, but from B to CD3, and this mirrors what's happening on the other side of the highway in terms of the proximity to the 95. And you know, if you blew this map up, you would see similar zoned CD3 on the south side of 95 in the same area. So I would support this.
Hey, look, we need to move on some of these. I'll remind you that whatever decision we make is not necessarily final. The public will get at least one more bite at the apple on these contested properties when we hold a public hearing. So although we ought to make considered judgments, I don't favor our beating a dead horse. And perhaps what we ought to do on this one is just a simple vote among the members, see where the vote falls. If there's a strong enough feeling to move it to upzone it, then let's upzone it. And if there is not, then let's not. But I think if we want to continue moving this forward, we have to start making decisions on these. So with that, I'd ask if by a show of hands, how many believe this small neighborhood ought to be upzoned? Okay, so I've got Galen, I've got Nick, I've got JJ, Darius, Anna. It's one. I'm sorry, please keep your hands up. I'm a little slow. I'm still recovering from COVID. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And
7, Mr. Chairman.
who am I missing? I'm sorry.
Galen too, so she's.
Oh, I
In Chapin.
apologize, Galen. Then let's
No. Galen has her hand up. She's saying yes.
yes, I think that's what Steve said.
Okay. I thought you said that she
Everyone
wasn't sure.
except Richard and Tammy, and then there were no abstentions.
Okay, then let's move forward again for the time being on upzoning this and move on to the next property.
Oh, Brian, I thought we had taken this one out. I thought this one was not part of the conversation.
We're not, you know.
You may be right. Let's see.
I don't recall anything with that area, if I'm recalling correctly.
Okay.
Well, you did send it to us in the packet, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about it, that's fine. I just don't recall. I thought there was
I
not.
thought this was settled.
I thought-
Settled in what direction? You just remind us.
Leaving it CD4 as proposed.
Right.
Is that on the minutes? We could check them.
We can come back to this one.
Yeah, and I
Alright.
would just like to point out one thing that I think I had mentioned in the memo was that as a means to, I think it relates with going to the CD4 from one of the other zones, upzoning to CD4, is the way to, the concern related to, excuse me, the type of building typology that could get built there. So in the form-based code, it has what's defined as a small multifamily building and a large multifamily building. And the small multifamily building restricts the number of units to 6, which you can obviously change that number if you felt that was too high, too low, whatever you wanted, which direction you wanted to go. Where the large multifamily building was 7 or more, the proposal that we put together which might mitigate some of the concerns about tear downs would be to only allow the large multifamily buildings in the CD4 within a quarter mile of a mass transit station, which I think could solve some of that problem. So if you had a property now that had a 2-family, for example, I think the odds are much more likely that they'll add a unit or 2 internally or through addition versus tearing it down. The economics will probably be more beneficial to go that route versus a tear down for 2 units. I don't think the finances are going to pencil out for that. But if you did the large multifamily where they could do 8 or 9 units, then it's definitely going to be a different equation for them to go from 2 units to add 6 or 7 or 8 more. So I think that's where the difference lies.
And Steve, how are you defining a transit station?
It would be either not a bus stop, but would be like the Pulse Point or East Norwalk train station, South Norwalk, something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely not a bus stop, because then we'd be chasing them around all over the place.
Exactly. Okay, this next property, Hospital Hill.
Yeah, this had a few different neighborhoods that were flagged for further conversation. I think there was 3, maybe 4 streets that we kind of left up to TBD. I did send out that email we received from Attorney Suchi today about the hospital employment in Norwalk. I didn't go back and ask how many they are within a half mile of the hospital or something like that. I suppose I could do that. I don't know if they have that data to that that level, but there is still a pretty significant number of employers the hospital does have within the city. So I think that was one of from staff's opinion was one of the big kind of justifications for the increased density within that kind of arc around the hospital itself. So Brian, I know it's easy to scroll down and then
Steve,
hit the neighborhoods.
is Attorney Suchi, does she represent the hospital? Is that how she
Yeah.
has that information? Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Yeah. Brian, which streets do we have flagged on this map? It doesn't say, so it's hard to.
So there was the Cedar Crest through Taylor section here.
Okay.
And then we had, I believe, the Magnolia section up to the northwest of the hospital.
Yeah, I think those were the 2 main ones in this area we talked about.
So we had asked you guys to go back and look at those sections specifically and get more information, right?
Yeah, I mean, in just when we first looked at these, and then a lot of the conversation had to do with the appropriateness of the street network in these areas. Could it handle the were they super narrow roads, dead ends, those kind of things. I think these all have appropriate access points in and out. It seems on our mind to make sense. What I kind of referenced before, within the CD4 zone, that change that would only allow the smaller multifamily in these areas would hopefully not end up with significant alterations for the areas that are already two-family zone now. So that would, for the most part, I think the Cedar Crest area that covers that's all C zone now. And again, this area is kind of just tricky in terms of trying to pin down the density, because it kind of hops in and out based on which property you're looking at, goes from single to multi to two. There's not a consistent rhythm with a lot of those. The other area up by Magnolia is more consistent in terms of what the existing density is. But again, that's, was one of the areas was flagged just based on its proximity, walking distance wise, to the hospital itself.
Steve, on that thing you keep referring to, there are D zones and neighborhood business districts zones today that have 6 or more units further than a quarter of a mile, half a mile from transit today, right?
There probably are a lot of the properties in the area we're looking at now that have the existing D zone, which would be in the center map. A lot of those are probably, those are not, there are some larger properties that have more, but a lot of those lots are not huge. They're not super wide.
Right. I mean, personally, I don't love that amendment, but we can table or talk about it. I don't know if that's necessary, but love to see what other folks think about that. But I don't even need to know if we need to talk about that piece of it today, but just throwing it out there.
Well, I'd just like to point out a couple of observations about this, if I may, Lou.
Go ahead.
Thank you. In the existing zone, the streets, Cedar and Ivy are currently in the C zone, and it's going to be upzoned to CD4. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but those two streets abut Colonial Village, which is very densely populated. They're adding housing in there, taking away the open space. So you're really jamming stuff into this neighborhood. And I don't know if anybody drives on Ferris or Glenwood. They have expanded condominiums on those streets that go into the back. There's zero green space, like maybe there's 10 square feet in the front. And Woodbury has so many cars parked on both sides of the street that if you're trying to go up to get to Stevens Street to get to the hospital, you literally have to pull into sort of the driveway area to let the car either coming down the hill or going up the hill pass. So add the density, but the parking situation and this accessibility for driving through there is going to change. And, great, it's dense, people can walk to the hospital to work, but I would just point out that it's somewhat unsustainable right now on some of those streets off of Connecticut Avenue. I don't know if anybody bothered to go over there and walk around or drive around.
I agree with you, Tammy. I actually drove through there yesterday and the day before on Ferris, actually just as the kids were getting off the school bus, elementary age kids, and it was very stressful for parents, people who were driving, the bus driver. And then to your point around Ivy and Cedar Crest, that's already pretty much single family. There are a few two families around the corner, I would say around Phillips, and that's a bit more multifamily. So I definitely think that this zone in particular does deserve a lot of discussion.
Yeah. And not everybody that's going to live in these neighborhoods is going to work at the hospital, and they're not all just going to have one car. So, add the density, but I think we're going to pay the price in some shape or form. Look at that apartment building that's across the street from Lowe's. Every one of their parking spaces is full now that building is occupied.
Further comment?
Well, I do have a comment about the building across the street from Lowe's. And when you say that every spot is taken, isn't that a good thing? I mean, when did that become a bad
It's
thing?
not a judgment call. I'm just pointing out that every parking space is taken, so, and those people allegedly live on the transportation corridor, people still want their cars, is my observation. I'm not trying to make it a positive or a negative.
But to Anna's point that she made last week that I really love, it's giving you an option not to jump in
Yep.
your car for every errand that you have to run. And
Exactly.
Well,
and so to your point, you know, I wasn't on Ferris recently, but I was on Ferris like within the last 2 months. And you're right, you know, there is congestion there, but the time of day that you went, Darius, when the kids are getting off the school buses and the parents are lined up to escort their children, yes, you're going to have much more congestion than you would at, 10 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, I was on Woodbury Street on a Sunday in the afternoon and on a Monday, late after, like 5:30, 6 o'clock. It's parking on both sides of the street and two cars cannot pass comfortably.
I
driving.
agree. I work in the area near Tracy School, and it is line to line cars when school is in session.
No, this is not on school though. I'm just
Oh,
saying
okay.
on a Sunday.
On
But
a
anyway,
Sunday,
it's
okay.
okay.
Right.
Upzone it, go for it. But I'm
Yeah,
just saying
okay.
there's gonna be a lot more cars and
Yeah,
we might get a lot of flack for this.
Yeah, in this area specifically, I find throughout the day that it is pretty trafficked and congested. I've been throughout multiple different times throughout the day on different days, months, during different aspects of the year. And it's always been a bit of a public safety hazard trying to walk, trying to
Mhm.
bike, trying to drive around
Right.
Truman, not around there, and Glenwood. Those are more, what's it called? Single family neighborhoods there as well. So,
Mhm. So
and
this
the
is
streets are more
truly the
narrow.
intersection. This is the intersection of lack of enforcement for all these cars that are just clogging up the line, as well as density. And I think that these are two separate conversations.
JJ, if I can build off that, I'm glad oh, sorry, go ahead, Darius, my bad.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, but I feel like that is been a theme throughout this entire process, and so
Mhm.
it. I think then we would have to broaden the discussion as a commission of would we want to do like a part 2 of this after like a year of trying to boost enforcement or something.
Good luck with that. Sorry.
Thank
I
you.
have an observation here.
I mean, I'm all for it, but it's
Right,
not the
let-
reality.
Mike, go
I'd
ahead.
like to, may I, well, Chapin,
Well,
did
I
you
want to
wanna
hear what
go? I'm
Chapin
sorry.
has to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll
Got your
be
hand up.
quick. I'll be as quick as I can. So I used to live on Elmcrest, so I'm well aware of Woodbury and Stewart in particular, and Stevens, and how car packed they can be. And I think, looking at especially the chart on the far right showing the existing land use, it shows to me that we have a lot of multifamily and two-family houses in that area. A few, 3, 4, I can't really count, single family on those like Woodbury and Stewart Street in particular. And I think that the overcrowding of cars on the street are related to enforcement, but also to our current zoning regulations maybe not providing adequate off-street as needed. But we're also seeing like through Connecticut Deep had the e-bike voucher program that was just like wildly successful, and we're seeing like folks really picking up on wanting to use other modes of non-car transportation to go run daily errands and such. And to the point JJ was making earlier about having other errands they might want to go run, and not necessarily just to work, but especially being right here on Route 1 when I lived on Elmcrest, it's really nice to be able to walk over and get pizza down the road, or go and run my errands and not have to take a car somewhere. So So, I look at Woodbury and Stewart and recognize, yeah, they are heavily parked on the street. But I look to our new regulations to provide more of that off-street parking and more enforcement as we've talked about. And I do think that they're linked, and we need to be thinking about both. That's all.
Thank you, Chapin. Mike, go ahead.
Well, actually, the one of the tools that's listed by AASHTO, NACTO, probably NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And I brought this up in some recent application, but one of the, and I believe it was on One Cemetery Street, but one of the mechanisms to calm speeding traffic is to have on-street parking. Makes people go slower. And I'll just share that recently our street was paved, Elmwood Avenue, and there were posters out there, no parking for about 3 weeks. The paving actually took 2 days, but they didn't know exactly what day. So for weeks, we had no one parking on our street, getting ready for the repaving. And people were going 40, 50 miles an hour down our street. It was crazy. When the street was paved and the parking came back, we have parking on one side, but our street is so narrow, it's from the 19th century. It does not allow two-way traffic when cars are parked on one side, on the north side of the street. So people have to slow down and pull into gaps where there's driveways to let the other people come. That's automatic traffic calming. And no one speeds down our street during in the evening when, if someone's coming the other way, they've got to go very slow and wait for the other car to pass. It's natural traffic calming. So if you really want people to, because the other side of this coin is, if you really don't want on-street parking, you're going to have speeding complaints. People are going to be losing their mind because people are going to go 50 miles an hour down these little streets. And they do. And we all do. It's human nature. You see an empty street, you hit the gas. And when there are parked cars, you slow down because you never know if somebody's going to open up a car door. It's a distraction. It's proven by decades of research that parked cars on a street and on Cemetery Street, just to reference that, people go 40 miles an hour around that cemetery. As many people that spoke in that hearing said, it was a death trap at the bottom of that street, at the bottom of that site where it curves down to Gregory. And people who were opposed to the project actually came to the hearing and said, I don't want this project because the street is a death trap. Even though the project had on-street parking and narrowing those lanes to slow traffic. And we had 2 traffic consultants say on the record, it was the traffic consultant for the applicant, and it was our peer review consultant. Both traffic engineers said that those changes to Cemetery Street should happen regardless of that project. It should be narrowed to 1 lane. Why would you need 37 feet for width, which is something out of like on a highway ramp? It's something where people are going at high speeds. It was designed in the 1950s when high speed was the thing. So I'm bringing that up because it's very important to realize that on-street parking is not necessarily a bad thing to have in a neighborhood. It slows traffic down. So, and I just gave plenty of examples of that as to prove my point.
Thanks,
As it
Mike.
can also slow down
Steve?
like EMS and any other type of public servants who are trying to attend to a call. So
Well, we do have to be fair, we have emergencies on our street quite often, and when the sirens are blaring, they get through very quickly.
Okay.
We've had police flying down our street. They might be chasing somebody or whatever, because this happens, and they don't really get slowed down because everybody hears the sirens. That's why they have the sirens. But but none of our first responders have ever said our neighborhood was unsafe to navigate. As is with the parking situation the way it is, and the two-way traffic limited on Bayview, Elmwood, Hillside, Couch. You know, all of these streets you have to really slow down. You can't. I mean, people still speed on them, but the emergency vehicles seem to be able to get through just fine.
Steve, go ahead.
Brian, could you zoom in on the density map on the right? I just wanted to point out something. And then just scroll down a little bit. One thing I was thinking you could do, you know, maybe it's sort of like another option would be to leave Cedar Crest for the most part in the CD3 and then take the Ivy Street over to Taylor and put that into CD4, because the Cedar Crest is pretty much everything single family. So that way it's retains that potential for the 1 or 2. And then when you get to the east, that's where it starts to mix in with the 2 and the multi. So maybe that's another option.
Steve, I like your idea, but I think perhaps going on the back side of the properties on the east side or the right side of Ivy, because the ones on Taylor, which is the busier road, there are already multi-families there, but on Ivy, not so many. So incorporate both sides of Ivy and both sides of Cedar. I think that would be a good split.
Can you say that again, Tim? I didn't.
Sure. So Ivy Place, you would take both sides of the street and keep it in the CD.
Yeah,
3.
that's another option. You could do either way.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right down between the backyards of the ones on Taylor and the backyards of the ones on Ivy.
Yeah,
Because
I
if you
think you
make
could
one-
do either one. You could take all of Ivy and put it in, or leave Ivy out. Whichever you guys decide is more appropriate.
Okay. I would suggest that it would be consistent to have one side of the street the same as the other, and that's why you would divide along the backyard line.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you would take,
Okay.
you could put Ivy all in CD4 or leave Ivy in CD3, whichever way you wanted to go.
I find it interesting that Cedar Crest has been CD3, if I'm stating this correctly, has been CD3 for quite a long time. And yet
The lot areas, Mike, on the southern properties, the
yeah,
lot areas-
Cedar Crest has been CD3, hasn't it? Been, or not CD3, but B
Yes.
zone.
It's C, yeah.
Or C zone, I mean, for a long time without any conversions on that street to 2-family.
Yeah, the
Isn't that
southern-
interesting?
southern
That
parcels
is
are
that an
small.
indication that an up zone doesn't lead to wholesale changes?
The northern properties, that's true. Like the northern third, a lot of the ones on the south are under 6,000 square feet. So that's probably the main reason why, but I imagine historically they could have done so previously. And then, you know, when the zone got changed to down zone, it probably changed that as well.
Yet the lots that are on Cedar are double the size, if not more, than the ones on West Cedar than Cedar Crest. Mike, they're 4.
Yeah.
They're much
Yeah,
bigger.
no, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would support Tammy's, I would support Tammy's suggestion here.
Let's see if there's enough enough support for Tammy's suggestion to adopt it. So that, again, we can move on.
Can you restate Tammy's suggestion?
Well, yeah, Steve, can you give us full screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Tammy, you want to run through it one more time?
Sure. I would suggest that Cedar Crest and Ivy be reverted back to the CD3, including both sides of Ivy, and Taylor Avenue on the west side be incorporated into the CD4.
Okay. Can we, with a show of hands, see how much support there is for this? is there any opposition to it? Galen, I can't tell where you stand on this.
To be honest, I'm not sure where I stand on this.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. With the exception then of Galen, it appears to me that everybody favors it. So let's move on to our next one.
And the other one in this area was to the northeast of that by Magnolia, which is currently there's a small pocket. There are two of them, Brian, or just one?
It comes down to Maple right here.
I thought there were two streets over there that were on. Can you zoom out a little bit, please? I thought there was one area that was proposed. Yeah, I thought it was the pocket to the west of there. No, keep going west, keep going.
It was by Bucarelli Court and
Yeah.
then the one on,
Yeah, to your right, Brian. There. I thought that was a pocket that was questioned. Existing B zone single family proposed CD3 two family. Which is predominant, pretty much everything is single today in terms of what's on the ground.
Right.
Christie Street.
Well, aren't those lots also just what we discussed in terms of their size? So small that it would be so difficult to to build a two-family. Anyway, we were talking about Cedar Crest. And you said the lots were too small to go with a two-family because they were 6,000 square feet. Those lots look.
They're single family today, so they couldn't
Oh,
go.
okay. They're not, okay.
They're not eligible either way today. I'll try to find sizes. I think they are a little bigger though.
Well,
Yeah,
now you blew it up. I can see they are a little bigger.
Yeah, they do look a little bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, when you go south on the Hyatt and Glenwood, you see much narrower lots. I'm just gonna say something here that's gonna get me in trouble, but I think it's on Ferris. There's a row of two families now that have probably been there about 40 years. There's about 8 of them in a row. There is not a single tree on any of their front yards.
Mm.
And I can't figure out why nobody would want a tree in front of their house, first of all. But it looks so stark to not have trees, in the neighborhood. It's not that people are parking on the front yards. It's just odd. And it's just this long, long row of two families without any landscaping any kind of, I'm not sure if they're all owned by one person who couldn't be bothered planting a tree or whatever, but I just bring that up in that, it's not a friendly look. And affordable housing should be attractive, assuming, these two families are more affordable. And I assume they are, but why there are no trees and landscaping, I just don't know. And it's just a fear that people do have of seeing a neighborhood transformed by two families or multifamilies that are not going to pay much attention to the aesthetics. And that's a broad statement, but there are examples of it in our neighborhood as well, where absentee landlords really couldn't be bothered trying to make the property attractive. It's just there as an ATM for them, and people are so desperate for housing, they'll live in a neighborhood in a house without complaining to the landlord, "Hey, we'd like a tree." Anyway.
But that's also kind of where we come in as it pertains to design standards and, how things can be built.
Yeah, well, I
I-
almost feel like we should require trees in front of houses.
Well, that was my first question. Under the new regulations, would a two-family require any sort of sidewalk, trees, landscaping, anything like that, or is it the same as currently?
That would probably come in under the complete streets plan. That's one of the reasons we kind of move some of the regulations out. In terms of what we would require for streetscape. The initial draft had a lot more stuff related to that, but the complete streets plan is going to have that in detail in terms of, each street, what's the street typology, what that should look like in terms of sidewalk type, plantings, etc.
And then I just wanted to share from my analysis of the tax assessor data for the properties that appear to be rented out, the 2 families, the owner appears to primarily live in Norwalk at 58%, whereas for the single family rentals, it's fewer people that are, the owner is living in Norwalk. For owners living somewhere else in Connecticut, it's about the same, the single family rentals versus the 2 families that get rented out. And then it's really the out of state ownership that's the biggest difference. At 21% for single family rentals and 8% for 2 family rentals. So I just want to remember that the absentee landlord thing, it cuts across both types, and most of those landlords are our neighbors. And you can see it in the list of the people who live in Norwalk and own houses to the left and right of them and across the street and down the road and all of this. Just want to throw that out.
Thank you, Anna.
It's a good point.
Okay, so where do we stand on the balance of this map? What's our issue?
We never got to a decision on that, or you guys didn't get to a decision on that at one spot.
So again, the 2 kind of ones sticking out are the Christie Street area, which is this little triangle piece. And then the Magnolia.
I'm sorry, Brian, I can't see that. Can you blow the map up a little bit?
Yes. So it's this Christie Street area, which is currently B, single family, proposed to go to CD3, 2 family.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then to the east of it, which is this Magnolia section,
Mhm.
which is currently, I believe, C, yep, proposed to go to CD4. So those were like the 2 that were still kind of weighing.
I would propose to keep Magnolia at C. I've heard of parking problems over there already. There's like a teeny bit of sidewalks, but not much. And it looks like, sorry, coming back to this.
Brian, can you zoom out a little bit so we can?
Yeah, thank you. I want to see the houses.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah.
The Magnolia houses are primarily single family. But I believe there's a fair amount reportedly of suspected illegal 2 families there causing some of the street problems. I think that could be an argument that like, hey, more housing is needed in that area, make them 2 families and there's people who want to live there. I think it's also an argument that it's not sort of a stable street to look to convert, and it's an area that needs enforcement.
And Anna, do you have any feelings about Christie?
I haven't looked at Christie as closely. I kept going back. I wasn't sure if we were talking about Magnolia or Christie and then Ferris, and I got confused.
Christie is very single family as well.
Yeah.
And Nostrum, they're all pretty similar as well. I would suggest moving them into the CD3F.
Brian, can you zoom out and pull the other map in a little bit too? The proposed map, excuse me, the existing with the density? That might help show what we're talking about a little more. That's pretty good right there.
So Christie's going from current B to CD4
No, 3.
2 family.
to 2. Okay. It's hard to see all 3 maps at the same time.
I did drive down Christie twice today, and both times noticed that there wasn't a whole lot of on-street parking. A few cars here and there, but it did seem like a fairly open road. And it did seem like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. I'm just gonna say, what you could do with that, Magnolia is take that CD4 line and put it at the rear of the Fairview properties and bring it down and across.
Yeah,
That way you're capturing the multis that's there and you're leaving Magnolia alone.
And then I think with the same with Christie, maybe it makes sense to keep the line at the back of these properties. It kind of continues this existing zone line going south,
yeah.
and then it keeps Christie as is,
Yeah.
but then grabs in the west side of. Is that
Stewart.
Philip?
No,
Stewart.
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 I think we really have to pay attention to these things because it doesn't make sense to have one side of the street, one zone, and the other side of the street, another zone.
Agreed.
It wouldn't, it would be the back of the properties.
Well, the way this blue line is drawn around Christie, it would indicate to me anyways, correct me, sorry, Steve, if Stewart Avenue would change, well, it already is it's already C, and it would go to CD4. But so then you would have the west side of Stewart just going to CD3. So it wouldn't match the other side of the street.
Yeah, which is kind of how it
I
is
mean, granted,
today.
there are a lot of side streets perpendicularing to that part of Stewart Avenue, but Christie should be consistent on the east side and the west side of the street.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying is that Brian that's got that blue line would just shift over along the property lines.
Yeah, so then the west side of Stewart Avenue, if we're advocating that it go to CD4, would become CD4, or maybe we're saying keep it C. I think that's what Anna was suggesting.
Yeah, I'm moving my cursor thinking you guys can see what I'm doing, but
No, we can't.
obviously that doesn't work.
Yeah, so I think that we're at right now is the west side of Fairview moves into CD4, and then it comes down to this is that green. There's no building here. I'm not sure what that property is right now, but there's no building there. And then draw the CD4 across Maple on the north side of Maple. And then the west side of Stewart would move into that zone. Christie would stay as single.
Yeah, I just finally was able to get a view of Christie, because somebody was typing on my keyboard. And I do think that Christie should stay in single. I wasn't able to drive out to that one, but I drove out to the other ones. But I do think it
All right,
should stay single.
Let's go to full face again and see if we can move on this one. Steve, you want to try again to articulate it?
Sure. I'm gonna look at a map while I'm talking to Zoom at
Fine.
the same time.
And I
So-
can throw those edits together into a map for next meeting too, to verify that this is what we're
Good,
Right.
good.
conclusion on.
Right, so I'll take the two areas separately, the two streets separately. So Stewart Avenue would, the zoning designation would shift to the west side of, so all of Stewart Avenue would get wrapped into the CD4 and Christie Street would remain into the CD3. So you would.
Yes.
It
Go
is
to
3S, 3S,
3S, okay.
the
thanks.
equivalent to B. Unless
And-
we're adding back in a B zone, which is still up in the air.
Yeah, we'll tackle that another. night.
Okay, 3S.
Yeah, and
All right,
then.
Go ahead.
Then shifting over to the Magnolia Fairview area, we would take the zone line to the rear of the Fairview Avenue properties and leave Magnolia as is.
That sounds to me the way that Anna articulated it.
Yeah. And Highwood would stay as is, right? The CD4 would come up to Maple. Would Highwood, Spruce and Finley then stay as is? Or,
Brian, can you pull the map up? It's going to be easier to talk to the map, I think.
yeah, I know.
So here's Highwood, here's Magnolia. So I think
Okay.
what we're gonna do is move the zone line to the west side of Fairview down. And then so all of this Highwood, Finley, Spruce, and the north end of Magnolia would stay as 2-family. And then this north side of Maple would get grabbed into the CD4 along with this stretch of Fairview.
I think that cleans it up quite a bit.
Okay,
And then Christie remains, all of Christie remains single family.
Yeah,
Right.
and then this section would be 2, just these parcels.
Right.
okay. Okay, let's vote on this one.
Yeah, no, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Again, with a show of hands, all those in favor? Nick? In favor, opposed?
I'm unsure, so keep
Okay,
me as neutral for now.
that's fine. It still looks like a majority in favor.
I
So,
think Galen has her hand raised. I can't, I'm assuming that's a yes,
Right.
or maybe I want to talk.
okay,
Oh, I'm raising my hand in response like everybody does.
thank
else.
you, Galen. That's what I assumed you were doing. All right, let's move on the map.
Muted, Steve.
Thank you. I'd catch on eventually. There's 2 areas on this map to talk about. One was around Footer Farm, where basically staff had recommended just to clean up the zone boundary, single family zone coming in and out of 2-family zone. And then to the east, we have blow up maps we'll go through, but then to the east was an area that's currently 2-family zoning that proposed to go to CD4. And then we can scroll down and probably zoom in on these different areas. So you can see as I mentioned on the map on the left is the proposed zoning. Map in the middle is existing zoning, where kind of you can see where Flax Hill kind of divides this area. Staff had just recommended cleaning the zone line up and putting it on this Flax Hill. You know, it's a little different with Flax Hill than some of the other streets because Flax Hill's a little wider. It's you know, you could separate the zones on different sides of the streets and not have the same kind of impact on the smaller streets. But the map on the right, which is the density map, it does indicate that, the majority of the properties within, especially that along the perimeter of Flax Hill, are currently single family today. So again, it's just what the commission's preference is for this area.
Seems to clean it up, and it again probably not going to move much of a needle.
I think on paper, it looks like it makes a lot of sense, but when you drive that area, it doesn't make much sense. And I don't know if anybody on the commission remembers when the city was going to sell Fodor Farm and they were going to put 40 units of housing in there. And the citizens said, preserve that open space. And now there's a successful community garden there. Many of the nonprofits in Norwalk now are housed in the main house that was going to be torn down. And once again, if you take the south side of Flax Hill Road by Highland Avenue and turn it into the potential 2-family zone, it doesn't match the other side of the street. And it's a massively busy corner with Brian McMahon High School being, 3 streets down, just past Soundview. And when the traffic lets out there, it's quite congested. So like I say, it looks like it makes sense on paper, but when you drive around, I don't think it makes sense at all.
Maybe to Tammy's earlier point about the consistent streets, and I really like that too, of both sides, looking consistent in their zoning. How about for Soundview, Michael, and Haddock, having those go up to CD3, whereas like Highland and Flax Hill remain as, I guess it'd be CD3S.
I like that suggestion, Chapin.
Yeah, it makes sense that the two arteries, remain in a separate zone.
Brian, can you kind of flag what that would look like with your cursor? I think in my mind, I see what they're saying. So that area where you just were would go to C, CD3. And then basically you draw like a perimeter around the properties that border Flax Hill and Highland, and those would stay, which is kind of what they do now. They would stay in the single, but then then basically where that, if you see the line where Brookside Elementary borders Highland, you would take that line and go south along the rear of those properties, and that would be the new demarcation line. Is that what you're kind of describing?
Yes, and the only thing that's a little bit tricky there is Meredith Court and Upland Court are dead ends, and this map makes it look like, well, I don't know, maybe it makes it look like Upland goes through, but maybe not. I don't know. It just depends on how you look at it. So Upland and Meredith would stay CD3S.
And then
Meredith is split
But
today.
Soundview,
The cul-de-sac on Meredith is 2-family today, which is strange. So I don't know how you.
oh yeah,
tackle
true.
that.
Good observation. I don't know how that happened.
what are the
Inner,
what are the areas of those properties? I'll dig that out while somebody else is talking.
What,
I
you want to know the lot sizes on Meredith?
Yeah, I can find you guys talk. I'll look
I
at
can
that.
look it up for you, Steve.
Well, look at the 4 houses that are 2-family on Meredith on the cul-de-sac.
That's what we're looking up.
So that's where the zone has definitely influenced, that outcome on those properties.
And those are not 2-family, those are multifamily, right? The pink one?
I think
Oh.
we could-
Yeah, at
Is
least
that
you
what
can
we're
go
talking
access
Right.
this, yeah.
Those are multifamily, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pink.
If you drove on that street, I'd think you think that they were just 2-family. They don't. I would question that they're more than 2.
maybe to your point, like this is illustrating that there is demand in that area, that folks want to be near the elementary school and the Fodor Farm property.
Yeah, there's a deed restriction on that one the one property in Fodor Farm that's yellow up on the right map. That's deed restricted. That was sold by the city to someone to rehab. It was an abandoned house. The other lot that's shown in white to the left of it at the end of Scribner, yeah, that lot, that's the house that is owned by the city that's been renovated, that has the nonprofits in it. And then the yellow house was rehabbed by a private person, but I'm almost certain that has deed restrictions on it in terms of it being protected as a historic house. The city sold that with a restriction, as I recall, from
So what is that?
15 years ago. I'm just saying that if somebody's fearing that might go to a 2-family in a C zone, it won't be able to. I think Tammy brought that up.
Yeah, and the on Meredith Court, those are 2-family. They're actually kind of slightly larger than the average 2-family house. They have 2 windows across the bottom instead of just 1. And they're a slightly larger footprint than some of the other ones that were built in the 60s. So anyway, they're 2-family, not multi.
Tammy, how do you want to articulate the change you're suggesting?
Well, I liked what Chapin started out with, but so make sound view 3D, sorry, CD. What are we saying? CD4? No,
3.
CD3. And then make the block from on Flax Hill from Highland over to where our blue line stops the other side of Fodor Farm, be CD3S.
Chapin, does that sound right to you?
Yes, I know Zoom sometimes let you draw on screens, but I'm not seeing that tool right now because I was hoping to just draw. But
Look.
if you follow Highland,
It lets me do it, Chapin.
if you follow Highland North and then oh good, you have the tool. I guess I don't. If you follow Highland North and then along to Flax Hill as you take that right in that intersection, that properties abutting that would remain CD3S, whereas properties with the boundary of Soundview, yep, where you're drawing in blue there, yes, yep. And then those two that are at the very top of Michael, are those like the principal frontage, I guess, is on Flax Hill, right, and not Michael? Is that
Yeah,
right?
technically their zoning frontage is probably Flax Hill.
Okay. Okay, then those would be the only two blue lines I draw then.
Okay,
Yeah,
Again-
those are historic. As I recall, that's that house on the end of Fodor Farm at the top of Michael, at least on the right side, is a historic
It is.
Victorian.
It's a nice looking old house. The other one on the
Yeah.
other side is nothing special.
Yeah, and so that's a good argument to keep all that in CD3S. Is that, you know, Flax Hill actually is not a historic district. That Fodor Farm actually is a historic district, I'm pretty sure. That's how they were able to get the tax credits and sell off that property. But that entire row along Flax Hill are historic houses on both sides. And you can see from the existing residential uses, they're all single family. So I would argue to keep that historic corridor. Flax Hill was the original King's Highway. George Washington actually went down Flax Hill. Not that that is a subject on our agenda, but just thought you would like to know that.
all right,
That was the main road through town.
let's
Awesome.
go. I'm sorry, Mike. Let's
That's
let's
all right. I needed discipline right there.
let's go back to looking at one another and Chapin, you want to articulate it one more time and then we'll vote on it.
Sure. So properties with their frontage on Soundview or Haddock or Michael would be marked as CD3. And the properties with their frontage on Highland, Upland, Meredith, and Flax Hill would remain as CD3S.
Okay. Again, show of hands in support of those changes. Looks like it's unanimous once again. Okay,
I'm abstaining because I didn't hear part of the conversation.
thank you, Hannah. Okay, let's move on.
And this might be close to the end, and this is an area in pretty close proximity to the train station. So it's this one I think is just a good discussion point. You can see, unfortunately not zoomed out, but the train station's just to the east. It's a very short walk. There's a staircase that comes down off of Hamilton, I think off that provides access down to MLK. Right now, the zoning is 1 and 2 family C zone, where the proposal is to put it into the CD4, which would kind of match what's going on to the north, be consistent with what's going on to the south. And then, you know, as you get to the east, it becomes even more dense. Within those properties, there's a complete mishmash of stuff where you have single family, 2 family, and multi. I think Mike had raised this point, which I think is a really good point, is, you know, what happens if you upzone it there? What's the likelihood of the, you know, potential for tear downs for, you know, I don't think it's a historic district, but there's a lot of kind of neat old houses in there. So would that happen? So one thing I thought I had it solved was that caveat that I suggested earlier, that if you're within a quarter mile of the train station, you can only do that small multifamily building. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for this area, that since it was within a quarter of a mile, so that provision wouldn't work here, wouldn't, you know, prevent that. So I think it's really just comes down to a question of, do you think this area, given its location, is an appropriate area for more density? Or should it remain in the 1 and 2 family zone as more of a, you know, a potential preservation tool for the buildings that are there now? I think that's really the way I see the discussion.
I believe that it should be kept 1 and 2, and the streets are all, again, very narrow.
I sort of disagree there. It's just the proximity to the train station is so valuable to getting people not to needing to drive, to being able to walk around to things like including, you know, CD4 now allows for more retail and stores. Like this is the prime core of the city. And this is where we say we don't want to put density in all over the place. This seems to be the place where you want to put it and makes the most sense.
I completely see your point. It's hard for me to get over the public safety aspect of I toured this street the last few weeks at different times, just trying to get a feel of it, and I don't know.
So to your point where you said there's a lot of older homes, historical homes, there's also a lot of blighted homes as well. And, you know, I know that eventually some developer will want to rehab it and probably buy up 2 lots and make it, you know, multifamily as opposed to 2 family. And as long as they're providing parking, because you're right, Darius, those streets are very narrow and they cannot sustain extra cars on there. So if there's adequate parking to go along with the density of housing, then that makes sense to me.
I agree.
And I know for certain that, you know, the older homes down there, that the landlords do not live there. They are out of town and they just collect rent. It shows. It shows. So, you know, and the area over by Paradiso, that's going towards Bolton Street. And we discussed that like a couple of months ago in regard to the congestion down there of parking and, you know, whether or not it could sustain more housing. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is that if it's, that street is pretty much a dead end, Boughton, and I would say no, kind of leave that as is. But then going by the train station, Lexington, Lubrano, Ely, Franklin, Mulvoy, those are prime real estate that is part of the TOD, you know, initiative. And so, you know, we should look to bringing it up in a way that is going to reflect the new initiative, but without very important, without tearing down, you know, the character of these nice narrow streets. So, you know, parking would have to be part of the development.
Wait, but Lexington, Lebrano, that area isn't proposed to go up, right?
No,
Steve?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We're
Okay,
just
so-
talking about
It's
Cleveland.
already,
yeah,
it's
Oh, okay.
already something else.
yeah,
NB. What's
Okay,
NB?
so we're talking about Hamilton and Cleveland, right?
yeah.
Same
That's just
neighborhood.
that within that blue boundary right there,
Right.
to the west of Martin Luther King.
Right, but they kind of all converged into each other, you know, the train station being the center point. And so I would say, you know, it's kind of like honor. Don't just build up one neighborhood and ignore the other.
Yeah, this was, so kind of the justification here too is, so the South Lake of Boughton is neighborhood business, so multifamily, small retail. And then it goes through this patch of 2, and then it goes back into multifamily. So it's kind of just closing the gap between the 2 sections.
Right.
What height is, excuse me, what height is permitted in the CD4?
3.5 stories,
I'm sorry?
3.5 versus existing 2.5.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question, Mike here. Maybe a year ago, do you remember Ivy came in on Flax Hill Road for a text amendment? And we devise something that was an incentive to allow more density if they save the historic house in the front. I think you might recall that. We already had previous language, up on Elm Crest Terrace that was utilized there, but then we revised it even further. Can you just, do you remember, Steve or Brian, how that would look in relationship to Cleveland and Hamilton if it goes to CD4 and it's a multifamily, more than a two-family, let's say along the lines of Ivy, and they preserve the house? What would that be an incentive to preserve some of those beautiful old houses in that neighborhood?
And potentially, I don't know if those houses, meet the criteria to qualify for that, but that historic preservation language has carried forward into the new regulations. So if you're within any of the multifamily or mixed use zones, if you have what's defined as a historic structure, you're eligible for potentially for density bonuses, reductions in setbacks, reductions in parking, increased height, if you preserve the historic structure. So that's kind of this.
And that's what's being used for Chestnut, right? At the train station.
Yes,
That's
I was
right.
going to mention that. Yes.
Well, I'm on the fence on this zone. It does, I know it's kind of my neighborhood. I'm a little bit distant, but the larger multifamilies on Flax Hill have not, and it's lined with the sort of old condos from the 80s and 90s. And then going, stretching that lower part of Flax Hill, which would be actually to the top of this map, have not had a major impact on traffic on Flax Hill. But Low Street is a different story, and Low is already really dangerous because it's actually got truck traffic on it, even though it's not supposed to. It says no through trucks, but everybody ignores that. And I can see why, because Low connects to Boughton, and it's a major shortcut, down into South Norwalk, more of the industrial areas. So, does it make sense to upzone Hamilton and Cleveland and add, because their only access is on Low, and Low on where those streets come out, there's limited visibility. So I would say I would vote to keep Hamilton and Cleveland in the C zone, or CD3, and not go to CD4 in that stretch, only because of the access onto Low and not onto Flax Hill.
I'd vote to bring them to CD4.
Yeah, they don't, just to be clear, they don't go down onto Martin Luther King. There's a big drop,
Right.
huge grade drop.
Yeah.
So what you may think is frontage on Martin Luther King is not. There's a stairway at the end of Hamilton that's going to get redone soon, much like the other one a little further north.
Means people will be driving less and walking down to everything in Sono.
Yeah, well, I've been making arguments against the CD4 in historic neighborhoods. I don't want to change my mind about it now, because this is a different historic neighborhood than what's around the hospital, which is those are more 1950s, and this is this is 19th century here. Anyway,
if I may, I'm kind of torn on this as well. And the lots on Cleveland are basically only 36 feet wide. So that's a fairly limiting factor. So I think, some developer, like you were saying, might kind of stockpile a bunch of lots and then tear everything down and start over. And Martin Luther King Boulevard, is a huge demarcation road. There's sort of what's north and what's south of it, and Low Street kind of connects, but they're totally different neighborhoods. And it is kind of sad that Cleveland Terrace has a number of rundown properties because there are some really kind of cool old ones. But so how do you preserve those old ones? What zone would best serve preserving what's there, getting it renovated and preserve it? And Mike, those couple of properties that we did approve up on Flax Hill were much bigger lots. I mean, like double, if not triple, and these are teeny tiny. So there's not going to be any parking on these little, they're 36 by 83 feet lots. So I don't know.
Yeah.
how you make the
Steve, you
street-
had your hand up?
Yeah, I think that I agree with I think that's the crux of it, kind of what Tammy said. I think if you upzoned it enough, you would end up, somebody would eventually be able to conglomerate 3 or 4 lots. They are limited to a maximum lot width of 100 feet. So they can't take 4 lots if they're like 36, so they'll be maxed out that way. But a very likely scenario is they could cobble 2 or 3 adjoining lots together, and they would probably, the money would probably be incentivized enough for them to take down what's there and then build new. So that's like this one, the way I look at it from a planning perspective, given its proximity to the train station, it's very walkable to the train station. So from a planning perspective, it makes a complete sense to upzone it to that area. But there's also you got to understand that will come with change in this neighborhood.
Right. On the other hand, as JJ has pointed out, this is a neighborhood that's continuing to deteriorate. Although it may not be an ideal solution, it may be a way of beginning the halt in that deterioration.
By what? By doing what, Lou?
By in effect making it more attractive to some 3.5 story development.
Oh, so in other words, by changing it to CD4.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah,
and there already are.
I'm torn the same way as others are. This is historic, relatively low income housing, and I hate for us to lose it. But if the outcome is continuing deterioration, it doesn't serve anybody's interest.
I think there's also a number of properties here that seem to be non-conforming, right? There's a number of multifamily already here. And I think that's what pushes me towards, because I'm also feeling this confliction, but I think that's what's pushing me towards wanting this to be CD4, that and its proximity to the train station and that staircase. It's great to hear that that's going to be improved. Excellent. It just seems like it would bring a number of these properties into conformity as well.
And Steve, with the historic bonus factor, it does not have to be adjoining, correct?
They'd have to be like a unified development.
Does it? I thought we said it could be within the same zone.
No, we didn't do
Chestnut.
anything along
We
the
didn't do
lines of
anything?
like a transfer of development rights at this stage.
Well, Mike,
We
that could be
said it had to
something
be
we
a
can
budding.
consider in the broader zoning rewrite, is if we want to include something like that to encourage people to find spots to preserve that they might not, that will give them benefits, a couple blocks away.
Can we flag that as something we can dive deep into in one of these
Yeah.
meetings?
Galen,
Go ahead.
Galen, go ahead.
Well, I just very simply wanted to say the proximity to the train station, in my view, really trumps everything here. It's walkable to the train station, and we want to encourage more density in areas where it's walkable to the train station, I believe.
Well, if we could figure out, I agree with that too. I mean, I think I'm torn, just like everybody else is. I always look on Haviland Street, what Keith Brown did as a model for historic preservation. He moved, there was a sea captain's house in the way of the police station. from the, I think, 1850s. He moved it around the corner. I remember I just moved into Norwalk. It was 25 years ago. Moved it down Haviland Street, and then he built a lot of multifamily. I believe they're condos in the house itself, and then all behind it. And if we had a model for that on Cleveland and Hamilton, where we could have clustered historic houses with multifamily behind them, so you preserve that would be ideal. But unfortunately, we just can't select the developers that we want for who are respectful of historical houses.
But it's a CD, what does it say? It's a CD, it's a C zone?
It's a C zone
Yeah.
now, and it's gonna go to
It's a
CD4.
C zone that
So there's nothing that
have
prevents
two
someone.
families and multifamily.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's nothing that prevents someone today from leveling a home or rebuilding one of those things, right?
Except for the 6,000 square
The
feet.
size of
square
the
foot.
lots are so much smaller on Cleveland though, even than the ones over on Hanford Place. Mike, I'm just looking them up. They have a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah.
What if we move the line and just did the blue on Low Street and then left Cleveland in the, I know we're trying to make this more unified, but we're kind of stuck here. So what if you take the blue line and just make Low Street with the multifamily because it has more multi and two family, and then leave Cleveland only two family, but not multifamily? Because I think a lot of those houses along there already are being used as two family, even though they might not.
But what does that really get you?
Well, it gets you a few more units. It gets you units along Low Street, which is the busier street. It leaves Cleveland as a neighborhood. People can still walk to the train
Why are
station.
we saying that like multifamily doesn't equal neighborhood? Isn't that a little?
Right.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that people are concerned that the street is so small in there that how do you try to maximize it without clogging it up?
A couple things too. I mean, I don't know if you want to split Low Street because then you did what you didn't want to do in other areas, have the zone
Yeah.
on one side than the other. I mean, if you look at the property, particularly on the right, on the east side of Cleveland Street, I haven't measured those, but those are so shallow. It's going to restrict what you can do there regardless. You're not going to be able to, they may end up being left alone just by default. I mean, you're talking 70 to 80 feet deep. So it's, I don't know what you're going to be able to do there regardless. You'll probably end up with like small multifamily either way.
Yeah, so I say for now, let's leave this. Well, Cleveland as CD3 as was just suggested, and Low because of the multifamily CD4 on one side. But is that just getting convoluted now? I mean, I'm looking back over.
Could we take a straw poll just
Let's
on
go-
what the
let's-
current proposal is?
Let's go face to face.
Sure. I'd like just one other quick thing. I just did a quick measure on the widths.
Yeah.
They're about 35 feet if our mapping is correct. So you couldn't really you're probably not going to get, they could combine two and then a piece of another one at the most. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Okay.
Could we do an official straw poll on just what it's currently proposed as, making it CD4? And then go to the options?
Yes, we can. Raise of hands for all those recommending that we go to CD4. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm kind of abstaining. I can't quite figure this out yet.
I saw your hand.
We understand.
I saw it.
But that is sufficient to carry it. Again, this is not necessarily a closed issue. We can revisit it again, either with the public or if we feel the need on our own. But at least we have closure and we can move on to the next item. Steve, do we have a next item? Or
Um,
have we completed these?
Yes, that was it. That was,
Okay.
you don't need to get, this was, I talked about the small multifamily versus large multifamily. So we did have the other memo that had those 3 areas that outside interests or outside groups had requested changes to the zoning designation on their properties that we put a
Mhm.
memo together for you.
Okay,
The first one is 10 Bartlett, which I think this one is probably the simplest of all the requested changes. If you could zoom in, Brian, or maybe just scroll
Please.
down and zoom in. So on the left is the existing map, on the right is the proposed. The property right now is currently it's already legally non-conforming in terms of what they're doing on the property now. To the north is existing and proposed 2-family, which we talked about. I think at your last meeting, we talked about the map. Staff would recommend just adding that property in. It actually straightens out the zone line a little bit, removes a non-conformity and really doesn't impact anything one way or the other, but just think it's a pretty common sense approach for that one.
okay. And Steve, that CV, is that the ball field?
I believe.
Yeah,
so.
and
the fire station there.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on that one? Or we?
No, that made sense to me. It didn't, there were
I
no
have
red
no-
flags at all.
I have no problem with that.
All right, and then this one's a little more involved because there's more properties in question. The request came in specifically related to 57 Chestnut, which has the kombucha tea and the brewery and some other uses, which is that really kind of cool building there.
Mhm.
The request came in, and I think we talked about this property a couple different times. We talked about it during the the rezoning of the industrial zones in this area, and the request was brought in at that time to consider it. And the discussion kind of leveled out at that we'd bring it back up again when we were at this juncture. So we're here. It doesn't, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just this property, because if you scroll down, Brian, there are other properties currently zoned industrial 2 in this area. So if you change that property, you have to deal with the other properties that are I2 as well. And this map kind of shows it pretty good. 57 Chestnut's kind of in the center of the screen. Whoop. Then you have, yeah, the map's a little longer than the Zoom is going to cooperate with. There's also 6 or 7 other properties, maybe 8 other properties that are also industrials 2 zoned. Some of those are being used in a industrial contractor type capacity today. Some of them are residential. So the idea would be, it wouldn't make sense to just change the zoning designation for 57 Chestnut. It makes sense to then look at the zoning for those other industrial properties too, because you wouldn't want to leave them kind of isolated by themselves in either a non-conforming capacity or in industrial capacity if they weren't industrial. So the staff has recommended that they be changed in a couple different ways. If you could scroll down, Brian, with the properties to the, wait for Brian to catch up. There we go. I think that helps a little bit. So the map in the center again is the existing zoning, with the areas in blue are the ones we're talking about. And you can see that on the map on the right is the density map that we've been looking at. Most of these are industrial or commercial, so the density doesn't really apply unless you're talking about those 2 properties on the southern end or southeastern end of Hemlock. So staff would recommend that, consistent with the map on the left, that the properties kind of to the west of the railroad right-of-way, for the most part, be incorporated into the CD4, where the properties to the east are with 57 Chestnut and then up by Merritt get wrapped into the CD5 zone.
So is the request, sorry, I'm just following the maps here, sorry. What was it before? It
So
was I2 in the
they're all
proposal.
I2.
And what was the proposal before the request came in? That was
To
leaving
put it
that,
in same request is what we're recommending.
because it was, oh, so there's no difference, so it was CD5 and they requested for CD5?
No, it is and was I2, and they
Uh-huh.
requested to go, at the time they requested to go into the SSDD, which is the TOD zone by the
Yep.
South Norwalk
I
train
remember that.
station.
Gotcha,
And that wraps into CD5 and the new zone.
gotcha. Okay, makes a ton of sense to me.
So wait, Steve, that was Adam Blank's application? Is
Re-
that when you're
correct.
talking about?
Yep.
And did you send this to us? Sorry, I don't recall seeing this.
Yeah, this one went out like 10 days ago, I think. We sent it out.
Can you just scroll down a little, just so I can see the title? No, the other way. I mean, scroll up. Yeah, now go down. I mean, you know, up or down. There you go. I just wanted to see proposed, existing, and residential, and for the public's benefit as well, if anybody's watching this. So
Right, so wait,
proposed,
you
existing.
sent this in a previous meeting's packet of information? And we
I'll
didn't-
have to go back
and
and
we
look
just
at this
didn't get to it?
specific date.
No,
I
I think
don't-
he sent it out as a standalone memo. And
10 days ago?
It's dated
Roughly.
August 18th.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I know Nick just asked this question. But I couldn't follow the answer, and then I was looking at my paper map on the wall like a crazy person. What was it that the staff had proposed this area to be, or the staff or the consultants had proposed these
So
properties to be?
we when we were talking about the industrial rezoning in this area about a year and a half ago, we at the time didn't recommend a change. We said to leave it as I2, but we left it open for revisit as part of the broader rezoning. So we weren't like dead set that it had to remain I2, just because it's that area we were talking about it before with Cassuth and Olean, Lebrano. It's a kind of delicate area in terms of what you want to do and land use wise there, because you don't want to tip the scale one direction too far. So that's why we put that transition in between the CD4 and the CD5.
And so right now there's a few different things, but a lot of it is contractor yards and industrial use.
Right.
And we need more contractor yard space, right? So people aren't doing it in their front yards.
So the properties on Olean, those are recently approved contractor yards. So those are, they're all approved. They can stay and remain in perpetuity. The only other commercial properties that would, one of those, I'm not positive what they do inside there, which is I don't have the addresses up, I think it's 32 or 38 Hemlock. It's the larger property at the bottom.
38.
38. And then 32 is a small, some kind of small warehouse or manufacturing building, which would probably become non-conforming. But the other items in the 57 Chestnut area would not become non-conforming because the CD5 allows for a broader mix of uses.
And so
And-
this all goes to CD5. They could stay or they could become big apartment complexes, adding more cars and stuff to that area.
Technically, yeah. I think the idea, speaking with and I think it was in the memos that they put together, they'd like to, the idea would be that they put a lot of work into that 57 Chestnut building, and that has a lot of the same qualities as the 11 Chestnut building. So that, it has that historic aspect to it. So the idea would hopefully be that that building would be preserved in perpetuity, and then they would, redevelop other portions of the property to, add some different things in there.
And so they're arguing it's an incentive. Let's go back a second. The dark purple on the left is CD5.
Right.
It's not labeled CD5 on, you know, on there, but that's what that is, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so, that going to CD5 is an incentive to continue that kind of trajectory of historic preservation with additional development, but they're not proposing knocking all that down or changing it. And I think an argument that Chestnut was already burdened with truck traffic made sense. And so I would support this.
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand knowledge that those contractor yards in Olean are probably not the best use of those properties and not the best location for trucks coming in and out. There was a big contentious issue right before actually I started, which I had nothing to do with, which was that somebody was parking rollouts and containers on those properties, and that caused a big stir in the neighborhood. You know, Olean, Hemlock, Cassuth, and then going up the hill, those streets are really tight, and that's not a great place for dump trucks to be coming in and out. It's just not.
Steve, can you go back to the, I think it was maybe the Google map that showed the Smilo Center, and how is this going to, I mean, there are people living there, right? And that's very kind of sensitive property, and they just spent a lot of money restoring that or making it a place for families that don't have immediate housing, right? Isn't that what the Smilo Center is?
Yeah, they do educational programming, I don't know if it's job placement, education and training and those kind of things there too.
Is anybody
Absolutely.
living there though, like temporary housing?
Yeah, they do have some temporary housing units up on the top floor for
Right.
single occupancy SROs.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if they're long-term or temporary.
Frank, can you go down?
I do remember reading about that. I think it's temporary until they find something, but does that have any impact on this? I'm sorry, I can't.
So right now I'm trying, is that would help to have a label on that. Is that neighborhood business, Brian?
Oh, so it's that one
Yeah.
right below the word merit.
Yes,
And then
yes,
to this
that
other,
little
yes,
square
it's that little
rectangle.
square there. Okay. So it's in the,
I think it's neighborhood business zone.
Yep.
I'm finding these maps, this particular one, very confusing to figure out what is what.
So nothing would force them to close or anything. Like, is that
No,
what you're
I don't think
Tammy?
this would have any impact whatsoever on their
Yeah, I
operation.
imagine it'd have no impact.
Okay, well, that I think would be a positive thing if it did not have any impact on them.
Yeah, that definitely was not our intent, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think what they've done with Space Cat, the kombucha place, Five Fingers has his studio there. Like,
Yeah.
it's a great spot. Brings a lot of energy down there.
Yeah, I know the rest of the street. Okay.
But so by doing this, that would make it so they could change that, right?
But they can continue. Like, I think they have
They could
my
continue.
suspicion, without knowing anything about what the developers have, is they probably have some plans that they want to either add some residential or add something else to it, and the density is probably the thing that's makes the most sense. And you have the cutout straight to the train station there too. So it seems like they want to continue to invest in the area at in a reasonable, in a significant way.
And
Is it-
I know
is
there's
it
no
dense
intention to
enough?
do anything with the existing buildings, in terms of, there's no demolition plan or wholesale replacement plan for sure.
Yeah,
After
I
the
couldn't
money they've
imagine
invested
after
a
the
lot
money
of
they've invested, right? If they did that, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, no, they've invested a huge amount of money in those, in those buildings. They're amazing. Yeah,
Alright.
it's really, it's changed that whole feeling at that end of the street. It's made it more, lively and more vibrant. There's more people walking on the street. It's safer.
And safer.
And
Yeah.
safer, yeah. I mean, it's, we all remember, there was a time where you did not really feel safe in that, at that end of Chestnut. It was just kind of shaky, but with all of the positive changes, this zone change would be something I would support.
All right, let's go face to face on this one as well. Steve, do you want to articulate this one for us?
Sure. So the map changes as proposed by staff in after consideration what was submitted would be, and this is kind of paraphrasing, is the properties kind of to the east of the railroad right away as shown on the map would go into the CD5 zone, and for the most part the properties within the I2 zone existing today that are on the west side of that right of way as shown on the map would go to CD4.
Okay, via show of hands, all those who support that?
I support it, but I may want to come back to it after we've done the use table for CD4, CD5. So
That's fine. Yeah, absolutely fine. Richard? All right, not hearing from Richard at the moment, but everyone else is in favor. Okay,
No, I don't think Anna voted.
I'm not sure that I'm in favor.
okay, that's fine.
Mr. Chairman, can you
Then
hear me?
we have one opposed, one at the moment, one abstention.
Could just try to say something.
Richard?
I can't find myself on here, but I just wanted to say that Mr. Brown is my client, so I have to abstain on this. So-
Oh, okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, Steve, what have you got next for us?
There's one more area that we did get a presentation at from one of the public hearings.
Yes.
This was related to 43 Harbor Avenue. Currently, the property is in the D residence zone, which is a multifamily zone. Matches up pretty closely with the proposed CD4 zone. This property is on the corner of Harbor Ave and down by Butler. It's just to the east of the Waypoint development in Hull. They had requested that the property owner, there's a bunch of condominium units there, and I forgot how many are there existing. They have control over most of the units at this point in time. They would like this property to be included in the CD5 zone. Staff had raised in the memo questions and concerns. What had happened in the past was the area to the north, which you can see on the map in the center. So that there's the CBD zone, which is where all the Waypoint West Ave development is. Then as you get to the east, there's that transition of a lot of more older neighborhoods which are in the D zone today. My understanding, when the Waypoint CBD zoning was redone, was there were a lot of concern about gentrification in those D zone neighborhoods. So that is kind of one of the reasons why the CBD line stopped where it is today. We raised that concern with the applicant. The applicant is only proposing that one parcel, which is that larger parcel in the red circle. Another concern raised by staff was if you do allow the CD5 zoning in that area, then you're going from currently allowed 3.5 stories up to 6 stories. And I don't think that's the best idea when it gets really close on that narrow street, when it's getting close to the waterfront. So we came up with, worked with them on a potential solution on how to address the height issue. I think that's the secondary question that you guys have to address. I think the first question is whether you feel this is an appropriate area or an appropriate site to include in the CD5. I think we laid out the kind of the rationale one way or the other, and then we can talk about the height piece if you think that the change itself is appropriate.
I think the height, I don't see how we can discuss one without the other. Since I see the height at that location as problematic.
So the height amendment proposed would be to restrict the height to number of stories within 50 feet of the residential parcels and the street to 3.5 stories. So it would not have that loom effect over those other properties, would increase the buffer area you could do today. So if you didn't have that, the CD5 zone would let you build right up to the property line and go 6 stories, with it, you know, setback at the 4th floor, where this would cap it for 50 feet at 3.5. So that, I think that piece is okay. It's just, I think the bigger question is, do you want to see that area rolled in or not rolled in?
So I was driving down this very street yesterday. And I do think that the additional height outside of the 3.5 would definitely, you know, stand out. It would change the character of the neighborhood. It would definitely block out some of the existing, I guess, what people will have access to as far as their viewing. And I think, I mean, so you were saying that you're going to cap it because the partner property is like about 6 or 7 stories high, Waypoint. And it's all part of the same family, isn't it?
It was, I don't know if there's still the Waypoint's changed hands a couple times, so I'm not sure who is today.
I thought I saw on the map like a list of all their properties, and that was one of that was proposed.
Possibly, yeah. I'm not positive of that, so.
Yeah. So, okay, so I like your suggestion that you're going to cap the height on it, but I also would worry about basically the character of the neighborhood and also displacement of those neighbors that are currently there.
I think,
And I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other. I think that from what we've been told, by and large, those units are vacant now. They're not renting the ones that they own,
But
which I
they're-
think is,
Yeah, but aren't they right
They
across?
said there's 7 vacant.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, I don't think they're renewing. My guess is if they're gonna, who knows what can happen, but my guess is that those units themselves probably won't be there forever, whether you change the zone or don't change the zone. Just a question of how much density and how much height you
Yeah,
want.
JJ, I was worried about
Yeah.
displacement until the fact that they've pretty much already cleared the complex. Like I was really worried about displacement and that being a thing, but I think that ship has sailed.
Hmm.
It says
Unfortunately,
that 7 of the 44 are vacant. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
at
But
least
then
in
the
their
city-
letter, if they're telling the truth.
well, that means vacant, not rented, but that also means they own all of them, so they have controlling interest over what's going to happen with them. And I imagine they're not on, long-term leases or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know who owns that property? Because I can't find it in the city tax record right now. I thought it was Norwalk Housing Authority, but
Yeah,
apparently-
it was Norwalk Housing Authority on the left side.
It's Bell Point Capital, I think, is the
Yeah.
owner.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, can we be accused of spot zoning by limiting the height there?
No, not at all. It's not, because you're not changing it would still be the CD5 zone. It's just and this is something we need to look at, Brian and I have been talking about with the CD5 zone when it butts up against other zones of lesser intensity, that you have step backs and things. That's a pretty common tool that gets wrapped into the regulations.
I like this staying as CD4 along that area. This is a route I drive along a lot going to the transfer station, but I think it makes sense to keep that as CD4 there, just to give more variety in that area, and connect down towards that park.
Freeze Park, is it, or?
Yeah, we're Matthews and
No, it's Matthews.
Stones and
It's like the Devon, what's it, Devon, the playground?
Yep.
Yeah,
yep,
Devon's place.
Yeah, it's Devon's
Yep.
place. There you go.
the courts that are there. Yeah.
What is that
I
dashed
agree.
dotted green line going through the middle of your map, Steve? In the middle
CAM
map,
line, the coastal area management line.
in the center map?
It's the coastal area management line, so anything to the east of it is in the CAM zone, and then anything to the west is outside of it.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping it as CD4.
Steve, what's permitted if that's CD4?
It's still a multifamily zone. It's just 3.5 stories and about a third of the allowed density that you could do in the CD5. So again, I think at some point in time that's going to redevelop into something. It's just what scale do you want to see it develop at?
Right.
And their argument is that if it redevelops at the current level, they only get one additional unit. And in total, there's only 5 workforce units. And if it goes up, then there's a lot more units for everybody,
including more workforce housing. I mean,
including
it's
more
already
including
abutting, right? Isn't it abutting?
17 workforce.
Steve, is Quincy right there? Is there anything between them and the Pinnacle?
There's a couple properties there. There's like, is there one of those a
2.
church? I know there's like a small machine shop guy. I'd have to do a street view look to remember what was down there.
Well, the block has changed dramatically since Waypoint went in.
Absolutely.
I mean, it used to be kind of a nice sleepy little neighborhood back there.
On the note of workforce housing, the numbers they cited, I think are minimums. I could be wrong on that, but like they're also welcome to put more workforce housing in there, right? And maybe this is a discussion for another night, but you know, if they do want to add more density in there, or maybe this needs to be a discussion for CD4 in general, is if we do want to allow more density for, you know, doing 20% of workforce housing or 30% or 50%, you know, if we want to give density bonuses on that for upping the amount of workforce housing, you know, I think that's on the table, but
Or just require it without the bonuses.
right, yeah.
And we'd have
Yes,
to hear about the financing and incentive and doing that.
and I think that's certainly a discussion for another night. I would love to come back to workforce housing at
Absolutely.
some point.
I don't know why. So why are people against the CD5 with those limitations? It's literally right there amongst everything. Like you have Waypoint right behind it. You have Pinnacle to the left. All you have left is the machine shop and the church. It won't be able to loom over the church. It won't be able to loom over the units in the back. We talk about this notion of making, you know, there's a good benefit of having the density where the shops are that people actually can walk to. They don't need to get into their car like everyone's been saying. Like this seems like a prime spot for that. And then you get more workforce housing no matter what that is. Like we seem to achieve everything with that stipulation that Steve and Lou were talking about.
Nick, I would agree with you on this one. But I don't think there's much to walk to there unless it's a fancy restaurant over in the Waypoint. But anyway, just saying.
Or Devon's Place playground. Right?
You have
Right,
the art
playground,
cafe,
stepping
you have the
stones.
playground, you have stepping stones. My God, if I had a kid and I lived there, I can put them in a stroller.
That's targeted.
Yeah, no, I mean, good for
development.
living, but there's nothing to buy around there.
Right.
Oh, like retail shop. Yeah, sure. No, like but livable. Like
No
on a
grocery
weekend, like,
store, no Quick Mart, nothing like that.
No,
And
there's a key food right down the street. There's
Well-
there's
Oh,
there's
well, that's a pretty long walk, I would say.
Dunkin'
Yeah.
Donuts, CVS.
Yes,
No.
yes.
Okay,
So where do
Although-
we stand on this?
go for it.
this is an important moment to remind people of something that I remembered from one of the meetings a few years ago. And it was when Bell Point still on Waypoint, and we had asked, I guess it was when I was on the planning commission, when we were still separated, but what was up with the empty storefronts still around Waypoint? And it was explained very carefully on the record that there's formulas that potential retail clients use for street traffic and density. And Waypoint had not achieved that yet. They would achieve it when the Pinnacle went in, which is going in now, in terms of the critical mass that they would need to justify the investment in retail. And I just think that's an important point to bring up, in that there will be more services to Tammy's point, within walkable distances here, once that critical mass is achieved and all those empty storefronts are rented out, because there's going to be enough people in the neighborhood to support it.
And imagine if we
And,
had a nice trolley system that took you to Wall Street, just looped all the way around or down to Sono and connected all the areas. Like, it would be
yeah,
amazing.
I'm not afraid of CD5 here. The only thing with the access, there's blind curves, but they have a current driveway that comes out, towards Jennings Place there on the right.
Well, and in any case, those are issues that they need to
Yeah.
address with TNP.
Yeah, but preserving views for people who live in Waypoint, that's not really a concern of ours here. And this does seem to be part of this, sort of whole new dense area that's been created here. And in terms of its impact on the existing low density further north, that I'm not sure that's going anywhere. I don't know where the zone lines are further north, but I would definitely want to preserve, that existing low income housing in that neighborhood. But I would vote in favor of more deed restricted affordable housing as a result of a higher density here.
I second that motion.
Yeah, same. You convinced me.
All right, let's go back face to face and get a read on the rest of the commission. So the decision here is whether it's CD4 or CD5. And what I've been hearing most recently is a motion to approve the CD5 for that area. Let's do a vote on that. Raise your hand if you're in favor. Galen's in favor. JJ's in favor. Tammy, Nick, Chapin, Mike, Richard, and Darius. Anna, and Anna, are you abstaining?
Not in favor at this time.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we'll take that off the table for the time being. And we'll move on. Steve, believe you had one other issue?
Yeah, that's it for the map, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to bring one thing up. We can, it's 8:20, so I'm cognizant that I don't want to keep people long because I have bad news. You're going to be here a long time next Wednesday night, so sorry.
I'm feeling a
Dance?
sickness come on.
It'll be
A
a good
real
meeting,
fever.
interesting applications. I wanted one thing with the use table I wanted to go over with you guys, if we could, and then you can decide when you want to stop, and I won't try to convince you otherwise. Give me a second here. Can you guys see that?
I just want to put it out there that 9 o'clock is my cutoff time. I'm traveling tomorrow. So
JJ, I'm not recovered yet, so 9 o'clock is going to be our cutoff time.
thank you.
All right, can you guys set blown up enough? Can you see the screen?
Can you blow it up just a bit larger?
Close the document recovery pane on the left. That'll help.
Unless you need
You
the
would-
stocks.
Was this in, what email
Ah,
was this? that you
screw
sent
it.
us?
I didn't, this was sent out previously, Tammy. This is what we were
Okay.
working off of.
Yep, okay. Do you think it was in that 18th email? I'll find it.
No, this would have been a while ago, Tammy. This was sent probably like over a month and a half ago. This was the original
Okay.
use table, the second time the use table was sent around.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
the one item I wanted to talk to you tonight, and then we can wrap it up after this, which is fine. Again, this table is going to keep getting edited as Brian and I work through things. I talked about part of this last time, but there was an oversight that we didn't catch that someone brought to our attention. When there's the two waterfront zones, the CD4W and the CD5W. We neglected to allow common sense uses in both those zones, which are a lot of the water dependent uses, which I can pull the table up. But we would like to, or would recommend that within both the CD4W and the CD5W that you, and there might be a couple uses that you might want to exclude from the 4W since it's a less intense zone, but for the most part, allow the water dependent uses in those 4W and 5W zones to match the marine commercial zone. Let me pull that up for you just to show you so we know what we're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I agree with what Steve is putting forth, but I have to dive off the meeting now or my wife's gonna kill me.
Okay, Richard.
Best of luck.
Bye, Richard.
Thank you.
Hope to see you next week.
Have a good.
You too.
Okay, give me 30 seconds. I got it. All right, can you guys see that?
Yeah, it should be a little larger.
Let me find it. Okay, so this is the use table. So it's going to be harder as I scroll down, but the CD4W and CD5W zones, what we're proposing is to allow what's within the marine commercial zone for the marine and vessel uses. Because what ends up happening is you have the Bloom Brothers in East Norwalk. We don't want to make them non-conforming. That was not our intent. So we'd recommend adding, and I think it just makes sense if you're a waterfront use that you should be allowed to do some of these waterfront uses. There might be a couple things in the CD4W, for example, like the boat building facility. And there was like maybe a harbor port facility that you might want to put as a special permit use, but by and large, we would think that the allowed, most of these are consistent with what's occurring on these properties now. So we would recommend that the SDMC uses SDMC uses be allowed in this 4W and 5W, because those are really properties that, but the waterfront anyway. That was it in a nutshell.
Is that different than the industrial uses on the waterfront?
These are the allowed uses in those zones. So
like Divine right now, would that be in the
no,
new-
because Divine is in industrial zone.
That's an industrial zone up there, right? Still, okay.
Right.
So this is really south of where we were just looking at is the first one, and then the least intense one is over by Water Street and Sono. Okay.
Yeah, the least intense of the waterfront zones would be where the current Row 8 Nav Village District is, and then in East Norwalk around Cove, First, Second Street.
That
and
makes sense.
Those are different characters. They allow less intense uses.
Yeah, absolutely.
The building scale is smaller than the 5W, which is kind of
is
in
this just
between the CD
Water
5
Street
zone
then?
and then
Is the CD
the Water
DC
Street, the north half of Water Street is proposed to go into the 5W, where the southern half is proposed to remain in marine commercial.
Sorry, Steve, what are you asking us for our opinion on? I'm sorry, I lost the thread of this conversation. You want to ask
Sure.
about the
So,
marine use and the ones that the special permit one only?
No. So in this SDMC, which is the marine commercial zone. And it's the second column over from the right. So just kind
Right,
of.
the
to
last
keep
one,
that
yeah,
in
before
mind.
CV, I gotcha.
Yeah. So these are all the marine uses. So they're permitted all in the marine commercial zone, which makes sense, but
Right.
they're not listed uses in the CD4W or the 5W zone. So we would recommend that you allow the marine commercial uses in the 4W and the 5W. And the only exception that I think you might want to consider would be whether something that could potentially be a more intense use, like a harbor port facility or a boat building facility. Maybe you make that a special permit use in the 4W, but by and large, leave it as existing in the marine commercial.
Well, of course,
the
the
whole column would be
boat building can be something as innocuous as a place where they build kayaks.
Right.
And certainly no one would object to that. You know, as opposed to building a 50-foot motorboat.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I think it's probably a safe bet to leave them as it's listed. But I mean, if there was a specific use or two that you wanted to scrutinize a little more, you could consider permit it with limitations or put it in with as a special permit use.
Right.
But I think the key thing was, we have these great oystering industries in the city, and we don't want to make them non-conforming by
Right,
any of the
right.
changes.
Agreed.
I think we all agree with that.
Would it be helpful to put together maybe a memo outlining like what staff would recommend, and we can use that as a jumping off point, and instead of going line by line? I don't want to cease conversation, just a thought, because that's worked well for our other.
Yeah, we can do that for your next. Oh, sorry, I'm cutting you off, Chapin.
Nope.
Yeah, we can put a memo together. We'll clean it up and put it into a memo, and then you guys are meeting hopefully again on this in a couple of weeks, so you can circle back on this point.
Okay. Is that it, Steve?
That was the only other item I wanted to cover, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I have one item I think I need to cover because Mike is going to be away next week. And next week, I would like to appoint a nominating committee. And the nominating committee needs to be approved by the full executive committee. So that means both Mike and Nick have to be on board with the members of the nominating committee. What I'd like to do, Mike, is just send you an email after next week's meeting with suggested names for the members of the nominating committee. That work all right with you?
Yeah,
Okay, good. Okay, and
I think that's how I think we handled it that way last year.
I think that's right. The only difference is last year you weren't on Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
You were available. Okay. As far as my business is concerned, that's it. Steve, any comments from you?
Nothing
No?
further, thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners have comments? Go ahead, Anna.
Sorry, I can do this before 9 o'clock, JJ. 2 or possibly 3 things. Steve, can you confirm that the plan is to talk residential parking permits with TMP in October?
Yes, I don't have a date. Yeah, it will be in October at one of the extra meetings, yes.
Okay, great. And the second thing was at last week's Harbor Management Committee meeting. Supposedly they had some concerns about the change to the Marine Commercial District and building in the 100-year floodplain and all of that. Is that going to be coming back around to
Anna,
us,
we're going to need to vote on that. And
Okay.
because there's an objection, when we do vote on it, we'll need a 2/3 vote
Okay.
of the commission members.
Okay. And then the third question, what's the third question? I knew there was possibly 3, and I'm like racking my brain. Oh, enforcement. Were you working on a public facing sort of dialogue, or I'm not sure if it was going to be part of the commission process or separate from that to try to do some Q&A about enforcement and help the public better understand enforcement? Is that still on the sort of working plans?
Yeah, and I don't know whether it would be through the commission. I was almost wondering if you wanted to do it as part of that TNP discussion about the parking permits because it's related, or is it a separate?
I think
public-
it needs to be separate. I mean, all of this is related, but like, I think there's a lot to discuss. I don't know. It's just my opinion.
Oh, and Anna, you're referring to citywide, not just East Norwalk, right?
Yeah, no, what's residential parking permits, I'm referring to East Norwalk specifically because it was part of the TO.
Right.
The
But
plan?
but the enforcement of
The enforcement, I
violations-
mean citywide.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah.
Okay,
And those were my three.
Chapin, go ahead.
So I know this summer we had a sustainability roundtable, which I thought was really informative. Maybe a little bit time crunched, but I think we ended that with wanting to explore and have another one, maybe more focused on drainage and lighting. Not sure if there are other topics we'd want to cover, but wanted to see if we could get something on the calendar in the coming months here. As I think it'd be good to have that roundtable ahead of us talking about the sustainability measures in the zoning rewrite.
Yeah, we actually, that was my other recommendation for October at the other meeting, or you can piggyback it with the parking one. I mean, the parking one probably is not going to take 3 hours, I don't think, but maybe you do both of those in the same night. Actually, we met with Steve Clocky a couple weeks ago, talked through some things we could actually, we think might be feasible and workable. And I think we came up with kind of a solution on some of the sustainability measures. But I think I haven't put pen to paper yet, but that's on my to-do list for next week.
Great. Also wanted to reiterate things we've been saying at the end of all of these, which is thanks for the memos. They've been super helpful in helping to understand these, the side-by-side charts. I'm sure those take some time to put together, so we appreciate them. Thank you.
Tammy?
Yeah, thank you. I would agree. Thank you to Steve and Brian and the rest of the staff for putting together those maps with the proposed and what is existing, because I'm sure that does take a lot of time, but it is really helpful to see it that way. This isn't related to the zoning rewrite, but does anybody know when the hospital, Norwalk Hospital, decided to not do their hospital building? Some of you, Mike Mushak for sure, was on the commission, the planning commission, when the hospital came with this incredibly kind of futuristic design building that was supposed to be full of research and development and bring jobs to Norwalk. And it was definitely going to be part of the hospital. And when did they decide to sell that property so that it's going to become, potentially become a multi-family apartment building?
I think that happened after the merger with Nuvance. I think it was when Norwalk Hospital was part of I don't know if they were when they were with the Danbury Hospital and the Milford Hospital and whatever hospital up further north, when they were a group, that was the plan. But then I think when they merged with Nuvance, there became a new plan.
And
Did the
that
city
included
do anything
senior.
to discourage that or to encourage? I'm extremely disappointed that that's going to be housing versus jobs in Norwalk, and especially hospital jobs, which I think are good paying jobs. Did the city do anything to try to counter that?
I don't think it was anything the city had a decision on. I know that they did relocate a lot of those offices that were going to go there into other buildings in the city. There's a couple on Connecticut Ave, a couple different spots that they've taken space. And I think that's a model they've done in other communities where they have like branch offices scattered in the various communities. And then sometimes the doctors have hours in community A one day or 2 days a week, and then they're in another community a different day a week.
And wasn't there senior housing as part of that, Tammy?
And
Yeah.
Yeah, there was something.
I think there was either assisted living or a senior housing. It was part of. I mean, it was a really great idea. Yet I think we were all disappointed to find out that was sold for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not saying anything. That's not offering any judgment on the current application. It's just, yeah, what it was.
We have, any
Thank
other,
you for
business?
clarification.
Any other business before us? If not, I'll thank you all for your patience. I'm still recovering from COVID. So it's been a tough night for me. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
And then I pose.
Darius has moved and
Enthusiastic.
Anna and her son have seconded. All those in favor? We're adjourned. See you all next week. Take care.
You all
Good night.
feel better.
Recover well.
Good one.
Better.
Better.
Thanks.
Feel better.